Hello guys, this Science of Sport video is for BTEC, Sport and Exercise Sciences, Unit 2, Functional Anatomy. And we're looking at Learning Aim B, which is all about the cardiovascular system. So this specifically is B2, Functions of the Cardiovascular System. Your specification requires you to understand the function of the CV system in terms of these 5 functions. So specifically make sure that you could describe or explain these in some detail, giving examples relating to the system itself. So obviously our CV system is essential to keep us alive. It transports oxygen and waste products for us and nutrients amongst other things, but also it would be fundamental in responding to demands from exercise. So when we exercise in one form or another, our muscles need to make energy, they use oxygen often, they make waste products often, and our CV system is essential in the role of catering to those exercise demands. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail, but just to give you the context of the system. So I'm going to start at this end of the diagram. This is actually a reasonably advanced diagram, and it incorporates some exercise physiology. So this is and this represents the aerobic energy system, how we make energy aerobically. Now, I hope that you recognize this ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and it's that specifically that gets split to release energy to enable sliding filament theory to happen and our muscles to contract. So we need to, and this is like our really special rechargeable energy battery. It's only splitting ATP that enables muscles to contract. So if we use it up and we're left with this ADP, we need to basically recharge it, resynthesize it, remake it. And to remake it, we need energy. So we're going to just relate this to aerobic energy. We make energy by using oxygen, splitting fuel, making energy, and sticking the P back on to ADP to make ATP. So the CV system then, how does it fit in with aerobic respiration or making energy aerobically so that we can keep a good supply of ATP ready for a muscle contraction? So this is our blood vessel. And again, hopefully you already know that the CV system is fundamentally a really central transport system. It transports oxygen for us, waste products in the form of carbon dioxide, lactic acid, another waste product of making anaerobic energy, nutrients like glucose and fatty acids, plus other things. So it's really important to transport those things, so the oxygen and the nutrients, to the muscles. So this blue area is where we make energy aerobically. We split down the glucose or glycogen to ultimately release energy. Don't worry too much about the detail of that. But this is where we use the oxygen and nutrients and fatty acids and glucose to make energy to keep our ATP supply going. And of course we produce CO2. So the CO2 is made here and goes into the blood and goes to the lungs to be got rid of. So there's nothing new there. We know that already. And it just reiterates how central the blood vessels and the blood itself is in transporting the things we need to make energy and getting rid of the things we produce when we make energy to get rid of them. So let's look at the 5 main functions of the CV system. So let's look at function number 1, delivery of oxygen and nutrients to the muscles. So obviously we're learning about this in the context of being sports performers. So to work aerobically, to make energy aerobically, your muscles need a constant supply of oxygen, and generally that's not a problem. It's actually the hemoglobin in the red blood cells that transports oxygen in the form of oxyhemoglobin to the muscle cells, and when this blood travels in the capillaries and arrives at the muscles, diffusion happens, the hemoglobin dissociates or lets go of the oxygen and it diffuses into the muscle cells where aerobic metabolism takes place in the special power plant cells, mitochondria. The oxygen is used with, of course, glucose and other fuel sources like fatty acids. And the plasma, the watery substance of blood, is what transports these things. So remember, blood is 55% plasma and 45% solid things like red blood cells and like white blood cells and platelets. Glucose and fatty acids are also carried in the plasma as well, and they're taken to where they're needed, so obviously the muscles. So the first point is our blood transports red blood cells containing oxyhemoglobin and can transport nutrients like glucose and fatty acids to working muscles so that they can be used to make energy aerobically. And that's good because aerobic respiration makes some waste products that we can generally deal with, and it gives us this constant ongoing supply of energy so that we can keep ATP remade and recharged for our muscle contraction. And again, remember that it's type 1 and type 2A muscle fibers that can make energy aerobically, have aerobic capacity. Type 2X are anaerobic and don't use oxygen. That's the basics then of our delivery of oxygen and nutrients, the oxygen and the fuels that we need to make energy aerobically. Obviously, if we're exercising more, then more blood will be sent to the working muscles and diverted and shunted towards the working muscles, because the muscles need to work at a higher rate and need to make more energy, need to keep, we're using ATP faster, we need to rebuild it faster. So more blood goes to the working muscles, carrying more oxyhemoglobin so that the mitochondria can make more energy. If there is insufficient oxygen available at the muscles because we're working at quite a high intensity, we'd be forced to work more anaerobically, making energy to recharge ATP without using oxygen. And that's fine for a bit, but the problem with that is we will produce lactic acid and it will build up and we will fatigue. So if we haven't got enough oxygen, the problem is we have to work anaerobically and lactate will build up and we will fatigue and have to reduce the intensity with which we work. Just make a mental note that glucose is necessary so carbohydrate is necessary for aerobic respiration, but can be broken down anaerobically without the presence of oxygen too. So carbohydrate or glucose is a really important nutrient for us, and the CV system transports it around our body. Function number 2 then is kind of the opposite. So we've talked about delivering the stuff we need to make energy. Function number 2 involves removing and transporting away from our muscles the waste products of making energy. So again, you should know that aerobic respiration, muscles working, produces CO2. If we're working and using oxygen aerobically, we produce CO2 in the muscles, and we need to get that away from our muscles, transport it to our lungs, in the blood, and get rid of it. Because if it stays in the blood, it's in the form of carbonic acid. And basically, if we don't get rid of this and expel it when we breathe out, this acid will build up in our blood. And of course, that's no good. Any increase in acidity reduces or decreases the pH, and a lot of our cells don't like acidity. So we need to transport it away to our lungs and get rid of it. That's not new knowledge. Similarly, when we're working at a higher intensity, so this is particularly relevant when we're working aerobically. We use oxygen to make energy aerobically, and we produce the waste CO2. When we're working anaerobically, making energy without oxygen, we produce lactic acid. That's the downside of getting away without using oxygen. And we similarly need to get rid of the lactic acid from our muscles, and it gets taken to the other organs of our body, the kidneys and livers, to break it down and to process it. It's actually not all bad in the end. Just if it builds up, it inhibits us and it makes us fatigue. So we transport this lactic acid away from our muscles in our blood to those organs to be dealt with. So again, the CV system is a really important transport system to get rid of away from the muscles, the stuff that builds up when we make energy and our muscles are working. It stands therefore that if we are exercising and we are producing more energy, we're producing more waste products, and we need to get rid of more CO2. So the more aerobic exercise we're doing, the more waste we produce. Similarly, the more anaerobic exercise we do, the harder we're working, the more lactate and lactic acid we'll be producing, and we need to get rid of that because it will fatigue your muscles, be uncomfortable, be painful, and ultimately it slows you down and forces you to reduce your intensity. So function number 2 kind of makes sense following on from function number 1. So before we look at function number 3, just have a little look at this diagram. Pause the video so you can take it in. This explains where proportionally blood is in our CV system. Now you should know that we've got lots of different kinds of blood vessels, but actually have a look here. In the veins and the venules of the body, the venous system, we have 60% of our blood hanging around in our venous system. We've only got about 15% in our systemic arteries and arterioles. We've got about 12% in the pulmonary vessels, the pulmonary artery and vein, the pulmonary circuit. So these made up the systemic circuit, and this made up the pulmonary circuit, the heart, the lungs and back. This is the heart, the muscles and body and back. We've got 8% that sort of is at any one point in the heart, and just a little bit, 5%, that would be at the capillaries at any point. So the main point for me here is that most of your blood is almost stored or acting as a reservoir in the venous system, the veins and the venules. Now we don't use this blood the whole time, but it's kind of there as a reservoir. So most blood is stored in the venous system, the veins and the venules, ready for if we need to use it. Because obviously at rest, we don't use all the blood. We don't need a massive amount of blood circulating. When we're exercising, we need more blood circulating. And so we would call upon more of this reservoir to become active in the system and to be circulating to our muscles. Another point to make before we go on to the next function is, why is it that you were told probably many times to not exercise just before you eat? And that's to do with where your blood is, or where your blood is diverted or distributed. So when you've eaten something, it makes sense that your blood should be sent to your abdominal organs to help, because the oxygen is needed to digest your food. If you're exercising, it makes sense that the blood is sent to or distributed to or shunted to your working muscles, because they need oxygen to make energy. So the problem is, if you've just eaten and you want to exercise very soon after that, before your food has fully digested, there's a conflict in where the blood is being demanded. There's a demand to go to your digestive organs to digest. There's a demand of the blood for the oxygen at the muscles. And, what do you do? So does your brain send more blood to your abdominal organs, in which case your muscles don't get much oxygen and can't therefore make energy and therefore can't do what you want them to do? Or does your brain send the blood to your muscles so that you can try and make contract and make energy there, in which case your digestive system doesn't get the oxygen it needs to digest the food, and the possibility is that you feel unwell and you might lose your food. So that's partly why we don't eat too soon before we exercise. But underpinning this is the ability that our body has to divert or distribute blood to one place or to another. And you need to understand where blood goes at rest, where blood goes in exercise, and physically, or which vessels control this and how this happens. So let's have a look at this table on the right here. This is a blood flow table. Here are all the different sort of key organs of your body. So we've got the skeletal muscles, your heart, your brain, your skin, your abdominal organs. We've got being at rest, we've got light exercise, or we've got strenuous exercise. And down here is how much blood is being ejected from your heart per minute. First point, let's look at this. At rest, you eject nearly 6 litres, 5,800 millilitres of blood round your body per minute. That's pretty normal. Light exercise requires you to eject more per minute around your body. Obviously, you're going to be using more when you're exercising, so you circulate more blood. But I want you to notice that because the volume of blood you're distributing has gone up, it's got to have come from somewhere. Look again, here when you're working with high intensity or strenuously, you're circulating, roughly 3 times the amount of blood that you were at rest. So somehow we've got 3 times more blood in strenuous exercise than we did at rest. So let me just pop back to this diagram. Remember I said that the veins, the venous system, the veins and the venules act as a reservoir of blood. Extra blood is kept there if we need it. And this illustrates where we've called upon it to be brought into the system and sent around the body. So then let's look at rest. So we've got a relatively small amount compared to these going, so some blood, but not loads and loads, is going to the skeletal muscles, because at rest you're not really using them. A small amount is going to the heart, because obviously it's got to have energy and oxygen to make the myocardium beat even at rest. The brain gets 750, skin a little. Now the blood would go to the skin to cool you. So you're not exercising, you're not generating loads of heat, so not much goes to the skin. And actually quite a lot goes to the abdominal organs at rest, because they are key organs for us. So at rest, most blood goes to the abdominal organs, some goes to the skeletal, not much goes to the skin, and actually, and a little, the necessary amount goes to the brain and the heart. Now we already know that if you're doing gentle or light or submaximal exercise, we circulate more blood per minute, cardiac output goes up. But let's look at where it goes. So the first thing to observe is the amount of blood going to the working muscles in light exercise has gone up quite a lot, from 1,200 to 4,500 millilitres. That makes sense. The working muscles need more oxygen and we need to circulate the CO2 away. The blood going to the heart has gone up a little bit, so gentle rest rate, heart rate, to heart contracting slightly faster, so it needs a bit more oxygen to do that. Please note that the brain, the blood going to the brain is constant through all. Obviously, your brain is your central computer and needs a constant supply of oxygen. We don't want less blood going there and depriving of our brain of oxygen, because we'd feel faint. The skin then, as we do light exercise, blood being sent to the skin surface increases, because when we are working, when our muscles are making energy aerobically, we produce heat as a byproduct, and we need it to be taken to the skin surface to lose that heat. And then here, look, the numbers, all of these abdominal organ numbers have decreased. So there's a clear shift. At rest, blood goes to the abdominal organs, less to the muscles. In exercise, more to the muscles, less to the abdominal organs. And that's obviously much more exaggerated in strenuous exercise. Look, 12,500 millilitres of blood goes to the working muscles per minute, gone up from 1,200 at rest. Heart now gets 750. Obviously, the faster it beats, the more oxygen it needs to do that. Constant brain, even more blood to the skin to cool you, to try and cool you, and even less to the abdominal organs, and more circulating in total. So you need to understand where blood is sent or distributed at rest or in exercise. And hopefully that makes sense. But in terms of the CV system, the function of the system is to control blood flow. So hopefully by this point you've already done the learning for the blood vessels, and you'll understand that the arterioles and precapillary sphincters are really important for controlling where blood flows, and this is called the vascular shunt. So if we want to allow flow of blood into these capillaries, this capillary network, for example, let's say these were around some muscles, this arteriole would need to vasodilate. The precapillary sphincters, these little rings of muscles, would need to be relaxed to allow these tubes to let the blood flow through and into the capillaries. If we were at rest and we didn't need blood going to this capillary network for the working muscles, then these arterioles might vasoconstrict, the precapillary sphincters would contract, and in both cases the tubes would narrow or be, reducing the flow of blood into this capillary network. So you've got to connect the role of the cardiovascular system, in particular the arterioles as a blood vessel and the precapillary sphincters, in controlling where blood is shunted. Now, this could be true of the skin. So these capillaries might be at the skin surface, and if you're exercising, we want blood to go there to take the heat there, to lose heat at the skin. And if you're not exercising, you're at rest, less blood goes there. So in a way, this is what happens, and this is how it happens. And I hope that there's no new knowledge there. Please note that this isn't a conscious thing. This occurs because your autonomic nervous system is controlling the smooth muscles in your arterioles and the precapillary sphincter muscles. And it basically tells them to constrict or contract, or it stops telling them and it makes them relax. Okay? So blood flow is controlled by the cardiovascular system, specifically the arterioles and the precapillary sphincters. So here's a written version of that. I'm going to suggest that you pause the video and have a look at this in more detail. I'm not going to read this out. It basically is what I've said. So blood flow is controlled, whether it's for exercising muscles or for thermoregulation, sending blood to the skin, more or less blood to the skin. You need to understand how it works, arterioles and precapillary sphincters, and you need to appreciate what's the difference between rest and exercise and how the CV system plays a role in that. Okay, 2 more functions to go, and actually they can both be incorporated into this example. So a lot of I played hockey for many years on AstroTurf, and if any of you have played any of your sports on AstroTurf and fallen, you'll know that this is a pretty normal outcome. So athletes, sports people can cut themselves, can damage themselves in all sorts of sports. The issue with this is it could involve blood loss. Now, if it's quite a superficial wound, it might not be a huge volume of blood loss, but we don't want to lose blood. That's obviously not good for us. And also, things like AstroTurf, or the floor, or if you're out running and you fall and cut yourself, there's all sorts of bacteria and problematic germs that could get into this wound and cause an infection. So the last 2 functions of the CV system relate to those 2 points. First of all, let's look at this one then. Fighting infection. And again, this in many ways shouldn't be new knowledge, because the other bits of learning that you've done about the blood or the lymphatic system should incorporate this. So we've got white blood cells in our blood that are central in being sent to infection sites, so where you've got a cut, let's say, and basically trying to engulf and destroy the infection, stop any infection building and developing and spreading in our body. White blood cells made in the bone marrow, and basically often when you have pus in a cut, which you can often get, it's dead white blood cells. But it works hand in hand with the lymphatic system, which again you should already know is a drainage system of excess fluid, but also incorporates lymph nodes, which is where your body will try and fight infections. There are white blood cells in the lymph nodes and in the lymph. That is partly where we fight these infections as well. So our CV system is really key in fighting infection, because we've got these white cells in our blood and we've got the lymphatic system as well, working hand in hand with the CV system. Both are linked to white blood cells engulfing and destroying harmful bacteria and infections. And I've mentioned already, the link to sport and exercise could be, if you hurt yourself on something like an AstroTurf or out road running, then you want to obviously not get an infection, and you'd be stopped performing potentially. There's lots of nutritional things and, general lifestyle factors that can help boost your immune system. Because if you overtrain, actually, that can be problematic for your immune system and make it weaker. If you don't get enough sleep, your immune system will be affected. And that, to a performer, could mean time away from training. So it's really important that our CV system is healthy and robust in fighting infection. So the last function then looks at the ability of our blood to clot, and hopefully again you already know that it's very much central to the role of platelets in this. So if you damage a blood vessel, the risk is that you have blood loss, and also it's an open wound that makes you vulnerable to infection. So we have these amazingly clever platelets that when exposed to the air mesh together in a glue-like way to temporarily seal that damaged blood vessel, reducing any blood loss and hopefully giving some element of protection for infection. Okay, so again, here's the detail of the fifth and final function of the CV system. So we've got these platelets, which are very clever in aiding us plug up broken vessels or open wounds in our body, forming a scab. They work in combination with fibrinogen proteins, and fibrinogens basically join together to make this mesh. If I just go back to this image here, so we've got this combination of platelets and fibrinogens making a mesh, and that is what blocks and temporarily plugs this open wound. Fibrinogens are basically make things congeal or become sticky or become thicker. So really important for us as sports people. You're probably aware that more and more, because of the risk of cross-contamination or spreading any kind of disease or illness, blood loss in the sporting field needs to be dealt with immediately. Quite often you're taken off the pitch and the blood has to be, the wound has to be covered. So it's really important that, firstly, blood loss is dealt with and wounds are dealt with immediately. But obviously, the better your body is at repairing, the more it's going to protect you in a sporting context, and you can obviously carry on without any pain, discomfort, or blood loss. So exam questions on this topic can come very simply. So here's a lovely, easy 2-marker, 2 functions. State, just wants you to tell them, doesn't want any detail. State 2 functions of the CV system, and you get 2 marks for stating any of those. And those are the 5 I've just gone through. Lovely, easy marks. But also the questions might be more specific. So this one links to the control of blood flow. We know that's one of the functions, and it's asking you about the role of smooth muscle in it. So it's asking specifically about smooth muscle and arterioles and how the arterioles work to distribute blood, to direct blood flow. Questions can be, though, more involved. So here's an analyze question. Gives you a bit of information, actually gives you a blood flow percentage chart. So at rest, the skeletal muscles only get about 5% of the blood. In exercise, they get 80%. And you've got to analyse essentially how and why that occurs, which is what I sort of talked through. So here's the mark scheme. Firstly, interpret the question, the information given. Secondly, talk about the blood vessels, so the arterioles controlling that change in blood distribution and how it happens. It's under autonomic control, it's not conscious. And then this is the detail of how that occurs. So the autonomic nervous system controls the arterioles and the precapillary sphincters to direct more blood to the skeletal muscles in exercise. So it's asking you about the change from rest to exercise. So an 8-marker. This should be the basis of your revision of that function. Similarly, here's quite an involved question. This needs care when interpreting what they actually want. So again, it's for 8 marks, so it's an extended question. Now, in this bit of information, they've told you that they know, look, control of blood flow through vasoconstriction and vasodilation is one of the functions of the CV system. This allows athletes to take part in exercise. So they're telling you they know that function. But what they want you to tell them is, okay, analyse. So it wants a degree of analysis, 3 other functions. If you only talk about 1 or 2, you're going to lose a fraction of your marks. So analyse 3 other functions of the CV system that allow an athlete to take part in exercise. Now please note that the question isn't what are the 3 other functions, it's analyse those other functions and how they allow athletes to exercise. So you've got to relate each of the functions you choose to participation in exercise to access the top marks. So let's just look at the mark scheme. So you would get marks for identifying what are the 3 other functions. But for each of them, you've got to describe them and then make a link to exercise. So in my head, why it's 8 marks and not 9, so 1, 2, 3 for each of the 3 things they want you, I don't know, but there you go. So if you said the cardiovascular system is really essential for delivering oxygen and nutrients to the body, and this is done through red blood cells in the hemoglobin in the red blood cells, and the plasma carries the nutrients such as glucose, and obviously exercise requires athletes to make energy aerobically and use the oxygen and nutrients to make ATP, and so that we don't make lactic acid. That's a third of your answer. Then you need to do the same for another, so your second function. So it's really important to remove waste products like CO2, because when we make energy we make CO2 at the muscles, or lactic acid, and that goes into the blood, and the blood then transports it away. Obviously the more we exercise, the more waste product we make, and the more lactate we've got to remove too. That's your second function, and then you do the same for your third, whichever that happens to be. But that's quite an involved question, and half of the task is interpreting what they want. They've given you 1, you've got 4 more to choose from, but they want you to analyse them in the context of how it helps you exercise. So you've got to have this bit of it too to gain full marks.